Hi, please subscribe. My parents said they'll love me again if I hit 1 million subscribers. This case takes place in the USA in the year 1988. Tara Calico was born on the 28th of February 1969 in the city of Belen, New Mexico. She grew up in a close-knit family. She lived with her mother Patty and her stepfather John. Her parents had split up, but her father David lived nearby. She had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Those who knew Tara described her as an efficient, independent young woman, someone who was incredibly organized. She liked to make lists to schedule out her days in detail. She would sit down the night before or first thing in the morning and write down everything that she needed to do the next day. This included her college classes at the University of New Mexico's Valencia campus, where she was a sophomore, her part-time shifts at the National Bank of Belen, the household chores she would do, and her weekend plans. She even penciled in her time that she needed to leave for her daily bike ride. Tara was a very active young woman. The bike rides she scheduled in were no joke. She would cycle around 36 miles multiple times a week, if the weather allowed for it. The route was south of Belen on the New Mexico State Road 47 through terrain described as high desert, scrub and farmland. She would then reach a popular railroad crossing near Highway 60 and then ride back. Sometimes, Tara would ride this route with her mother Patty. But a few weeks before September of 1988, Patty recalled a motorist passing them a little too closely. It scared her greatly. The car slowed right down and even circled back. This encounter intimidated Patty, and it made her skin crawl. After this, she stopped riding with Tara. She even asked Tara to stop riding that route too, as she didn't think that it was safe anymore. She even told Tara to carry pepper spray if she ever went on that route again, but Tara just laughed it off. On the morning of Tuesday, the 20th of September 1988, Tara was 19 years old. She was dressed for her bike ride. She had her work top on, with First National Bank of Belen printed across the front. She also wore white shorts with green stripes down the side, white ankle socks, and her favorite white turquoise tennis shoes. And when she rode alone, she always took with her Sony Walkman. Before she set off, Tara spoke with her mother briefly, and she said something that would later replay in her mother's head over and over again. She told her mother to come and get her if she wasn't home by noon. Perhaps this was for practical reasons, in case something like a flat tire occurred. Tara did have a boyfriend, and she had organized a tennis match with him, so maybe it was to make sure that she wasn't late for this. Anyway, following this conversation, Tara left the home and went on her bike ride. Several people saw her that morning. Neighbors in the area and truckers driving along the road recalled seeing Tara. After all, it was hard to miss her neon pink bike. Tara was last seen at approximately 11:45 a.m., roughly 2 miles south of her house, still heading south on Highway 47. Many people later on reported seeing nothing untoward. However, one witness, Baron Freeman, described passing Tara. He said he felt something was wrong in his gut because a light-coloured 1950s pickup truck with a white-coloured homemade camper shell was driving right behind her, like only several feet away. This vehicle also appeared to have 2 men inside. He said the hair stood up on the back of his neck. It didn't look good, but he did nothing at the time. And he wasn't wrong. Somewhere along the next empty stretch of road, everything changed. Tara never returned home. It got to around 12 p.m. and she was nowhere to be seen. Patty, Tara's mother, became concerned, so she headed out to find Tara as Tara did ask. She drove the exact route, shouting Tara's name. She even slowed down to look over the shoulders of the road to see if she had an accident. By 2 p.m., her heart sank. Tara's mother had driven around a number of times, and still, she was nowhere to be seen. With no other option available now, Tara's mother went straight to the police. By the late afternoon, the sheriff's office sprang into action. Deputies, volunteer searchers, and a cadaver dog named Phoenix were deployed, but after a few hours, they found nothing, and now it was getting dark. The next morning, on Wednesday the 21st, the search teams went out again, and that's when they found something. As I mentioned earlier, when Tara went out alone, she always went with her Sony Walkman. As the searchers looked for Tara, they found small fragments of her Sony Walkman scattered across the tarmac. And later that day, Patty personally found Tara's Boston cassette tape, which she listened to on her rides. The plastic shell had cracked open, and the tape was all loose. It was spread across the entire road. Straight after this, the search team spotted bicycle tire tracks that suddenly veered sharply off the paved road and into the soft dirt shoulder. Next to this were skid marks in the gravel and disturbed soil that appeared to be from a scuffle or a forced stop. With this information, investigators defined the case as an involuntary disappearance. There was now enough evidence to suggest that she didn't run away on her own accord. In fact, Tara's mother Patty firmly believed that Tara deliberately ripped off her headphones and threw the Walkman and cassette down hard to leave a trail of debris. The next day, the search expanded. More volunteers came in, and additional K9 teams came in to help Phoenix. But despite their best efforts, Tara and her neon pink mountain bike were never located. The vehicle that was seen following Tara wasn't found either, and the drivers never came forward. On the 24th of September, additional pieces of Tara's yellow Sony Walkman were found roughly 20 miles east of Highway 47, near the remote John F. Kennedy campground area. Investigators believed that Tara had thrown them down to leave a second trail marker. With this, there was some optimism, like they were honing in on Tara, but by the 27th of September, the large-scale organized search was officially scaled back. But with that said, during door-to-door questioning, the police identified 7 credible witnesses who had driven Highway 47 that morning, and they remembered seeing Tara on the pink bike. It also turned out that 5 of those 7 people also remembered the same suspicious vehicle driving right behind her. One witness said that the truck looked like it was deliberately escorting her. By September of 1988, investigators put together a composite sketch of the driver using the 5 witnesses. The drawing showed a white or light-skinned male in his late 30s to mid-40s with reddish or brown hair. It described the suspect as between 5'9" and 6 feet tall, weighing approximately 190 to 210 pounds. The Albuquerque Journal broke the story on the 30th of September with the sketch. It generated over 100 phone tips and led to 4 formal interviews with possible matches, but unfortunately none of them panned out. And still, the truck was never located, and the driver still didn't come forward. The investigators continued to work on the case, but before too long, the case began to go cold. That was until 10 months later. On the 15th of June 1989, a woman in Port St. Joe, Florida pulled up to a convenience store parking lot and spotted a Polaroid lying face down on the asphalt. The photograph was in good condition, so it must have been relatively new. The photograph had dropped exactly where a white windowless 1980s Toyota cargo van had just been parked. The driver was a white male in his 30s with a mustache, but he had already gone. Now, this is where it gets incredibly chilling. The photograph showed a young woman and a small boy on what looked like a floor of the same van. Both had black duct tape slapped over their mouths, and their arms were tied behind them. The woman in the photograph had long brown hair, and she also seemed to have a scar on her lower right leg. Tara also had a scar in the same spot. Next to her lay a tattered paperback book of V.C. Andrews' My Sweet Audrina. This was one of Tara's favorites. Upon seeing the photograph, the woman went straight to the police, and immediately they put up roadblocks around the area, but the van had vanished. Friends who saw the image on the news called Patty immediately, and she flew to Florida straight away. She studied the original photograph for hours under every light she could find. She accounted for the lack of makeup and the time that had passed. When she finished looking at the photograph, she was certain. She said, "That's my daughter." The resemblance was eerie and unmistakable. The photograph hit national television fast. First on a current affair episode in July of 1989, and then on Unsolved Mysteries, America's Most Wanted, and Oprah. It was also in the newspapers everywhere. For a short period, it felt like the break the whole country had been praying for. It was proof that Tara still might be alive, breathing somewhere, even if she was living through hell. However, experts started picking it apart. Scotland Yard in the UK said yes, the person in the photograph is Tara. They were 85% sure. But the Los Alamos National Library said no. According to them, the facial proportions and bone structure just didn't match. The FBI's results came back inconclusive. And then came some interesting information. Polaroid Corporation said that the specific film stock hadn't been available on sale until after May of 1989, a full 9 months after Tara had already disappeared. So it was either not her, or she was being trafficked, held hostage, and potentially worse. As for the boy in the picture, he was first identified by his own family as 9-year-old Michael Henley. Michael Henley was another missing kid from the same part of New Mexico. His mother was almost certain. But in June of 1990, Michael's remains were found in the Zuni Mountains. He had died of exposure after getting lost, months before the Polaroid was ever taken. At one point, it was even thought to be Johnny Ghosh, the paperboy who went missing on his route in 1982, but this was never proven. And then, 2 more Polaroid photographs turned up in the following months. On the 19th of July 1989, a blurry close-up of a girl's face with duct tape over the mouth was found near a construction site in California. Patty thought this might be Tara too. Then in early of 1990, a third photograph surfaced. This time, it showed a woman loosely bound in gauze, eyes covered, wearing big black-framed glasses, sitting next to a man on what looked like an Amtrak train seat. Patty began to think that this was all just a cruel hoax. Years later, the family started getting some anonymous letters. They contained altered copies of the original Polaroid boy, with black marker drawn over his mouth to look like tape. There was no return address and no explanation. The Polaroid gave the case its single most haunting image. It still circulates online over 37 years later. But the investigators who have worked on this case for the longest time say that this whole saga massively impacted the search. It is unlikely to be Tara, and investigators say that it sucked up national attention and resources that should have stayed on the shoulders of Highway 47, where they believe Tara never left the area. The photograph probably belongs to some other horror story of kidnapping and trafficking that we may never fully know the story behind, including the names of the woman and the boy. 10 years after the disappearance of Tara, a judge officially declared Tara legally dead, and the cause of death was ruled as a homicide, but no further evidence or a body was uncovered. The case went cold. A sad part of this case, like many others, is the fact that Patty died in 2006, never knowing her daughter's fate. Her husband John and sister Michelle continue to advocate for Tara going forward. It wouldn't be until 2008 that a chilling development occurred. On the 20th of September 2008, on the 20th anniversary of Tara's disappearance, the Valencia County Sheriff, Rene Rivera, went public with some startling information. He stated that he knows the name of 2 local teenagers who knew Tara and who allegedly followed her in a truck that morning. According to him, the 2 boys struck her. Tara then said that she was going to report them to the police, so they panicked and killed her. He claims that other people helped dispose of her body and that families circled the wagons to help. But the strange thing was, there were no arrests. The sheriff said that without a body, he couldn't charge these people. Tara's stepfather, John, publicly pushed back, saying that there is enough circumstantial evidence to act. He was furious and he wanted to know their names. This bombshell, especially on the anniversary of the disappearance, was beyond bizarre. Two people, now in their 50s, allegedly killed Tara, and the sheriff refused to make their names public and didn't press charges. The FBI announced a $20,000 reward for information leading to Tara's location or the arrest and conviction of those responsible, and in September of 2021, investigators made a discovery. They had honed in on one suspect. A search warrant was given and the house was searched. However, nothing came of it. But not only that, any findings were sealed and locked away from the public. And then there was another twist and turn in this case. On the 13th of June 2023, there was a rare public press conference. The Valencia County Sheriff announced a major breakthrough. He stated that law enforcement now had sufficient evidence to submit their entire case file for review for potential charges. They said, persons of interest have been identified. The case is now with the district attorney for possible prosecution. However, no arrests have been made that day or since. In 2025, investigators still working on the case didn't want to wait for the outcome from the DA. Instead, they focused on gathering more evidence. Their focus shifted to an abandoned copper mine shaft approximately 25 miles from the disappearance site. It is one of 4 old mines once leased by a family who lived in Belen. It is said to have been leased by the family of a convicted kidnapper named David Parker Ray, but this has not been formally confirmed. Investigators set multiple fly traps inside the shaft to attract insects that feed on human remains at different stages of decomposition. If these fly traps contained these specific insects, it would be a sign that someone is down there. On the 21st of September 2025, investigators retrieved the fly traps. The results have not yet been made public. There have been some theories to come from the claims that the sheriff made about the 2 boys that killed Tara. Some claimed that one of the 2 boys was the son of the original 1988 sheriff, Lawrence Romero, and that the entire department had protected the families from the very beginning. They claim that they stalled in addressing tips, they refused to hunt for the suspected truck, and ultimately, they let the case run cold for the fear of scandal and a tarnish on the reputation of the city. This theory gained even more traction around 2013. It said that if you go to this place and ask the residents, they will tell you that they all know who did it. In fact, a Belen man named Henry Brown was suffering from terminal illness on his deathbed. Before he passed away, he had something to say. Henry Brown gave a detailed statement claiming that shortly after Tara disappeared, he had been told by his neighbor, Lawrence Romero Jr., and several friends that they had hit Tara with their truck. He said they then took her, forced themselves upon her, murdered her, and buried the body. It's speculated that Tara is buried in the abandoned mineshaft.